Look forward to doing our podcast tomorrow, eating some great organic grill vegan food and having a conversation about what it is to live a vegan lifestyle. I'll talk a little bit about things that are happening in the food space and the farm sanctuary world, and then open it up for questions. Being vegan, to me, is an aspiration to live as kindly as possible. So that's a broad principle, but then there are various ways to apply it. And that is one of those things that, as the vegan movement grows and expands, there are new opportunities, and there are also new challenges. But we're at a very exciting time, I think, right now.
Absolutely.
Where you have fast food restaurants serving vegan food because the market is moving in that direction. You have Beyond Meat opening on Wall Street at $25 a share, and within a week or so, it's over $100 a share. So you have big business now recognizing there's opportunity here. And at the same time, we have systems, government systems, socioeconomic systems, belief systems that are maintaining a status quo that is very harmful. And as we make progress at pushing towards plant foods more accessible in this country and animal foods having less of a demand in this country, there's a big push now for exports. And in China and India, animal consumption is increasing. When you think politically, I look back on the Obama years with some good feelings about some efforts that were underway, including the White House Organic Garden. It's a very important symbolic statement that we should be eating more fruits and vegetables and healthy plant foods. Michelle Obama, I think, did some very good things with school kids. But even as sort of progressive as the Obama administration was on food and healthy food, and the former USDA secretary under Obama, Tom Vilsack, is now the head of the Dairy Export Federation, promoting the exporting of cow's milk to other countries. Because in this country, we're producing way more cow's milk than we need, and we've been giving it to school kids as one way to get rid of it. We have over 1 billion pounds in storage of cheese, and we're spending more money to build more cheese storage stuff, and we're giving money to dairy farmers to keep producing milk. It's insane. So anyway, Vilsack's now trying to sell this stuff around the world. What would really be a heck of a lot better is if we, instead of giving money to dairy farmers to continue producing milk that we don't need, if we actually started using government supports to encourage those farmers to start producing foods that we do need. Fruits, vegetables, healthy foods. This is where an example of a policy shift that I think should be very much advocated for and hopefully will happen at some point. But part of it also, in addition to policy, is just the marketplace. And something we can all do every day, and many of us are, is voting with our dollars, buying fruits, vegetables, eating plant foods, even buying the Impossible Whopper. That's another way to vote with our dollars and show that plant foods are where the market is, and then big business is going to see that, they're going to start investing. And as plant-based businesses become more successful and have more money in the bank, they can then start investing in the political process. And this is starting to happen a little bit. There's a group called the Plant-Based Foods Association that is a trade association that represents plant-based businesses in Washington. And so these are companies that have an interest in promoting policies that support plant-based food, or at least do not disable the ability of plant-based foods to compete. And some of you have possibly heard about these state laws that are being proposed to prevent words like milk from being used for plant-based milks. Yeah. There's even a federal bill introduced to prohibit the word milk from being used for plant-based milks. There are also state efforts and discussions in Washington about the term meat and not allowing Beyond Meat or these plant-based companies to use that term. So with success, with progress, there are some industry people that get on board, see the opportunities, and there are some that dig in and try to fight any change. Yeah. So we're at a very interesting time. And in addition to living as kindly as possible, for me, again, what it is to be vegan, another part has to do with how do we relate to others? And this also ties into kindness, but do we relate to others in a way that is mutually beneficial or in a way that is exploitive and extractive? And when it comes to animal agriculture, I mean, that is about the most extractive and exploitive industry there is. We mass produce animals through artificial insemination, and so we control every aspect of their lives from conception as they live and then to their slaughter. So we have all this control over these animals. And we treat them with absolute disdain. When one group mistreats another group, there are various approaches to that. One approach, I think the healthy human approach, is to have empathy and say, I'm causing harm. I feel your pain. I don't want to keep contributing to it. That's, I think, the healthy human empathetic response. But another response is, I'm mistreating you, and I'm doing it because you don't deserve any better, and because I'm superior in some way. That's the other thing that happens. And in animal agriculture, farm animals are treated with disdain and then denigrated. And this happens in subtle ways that we sometimes don't even think about. You know, being called a turkey, for example, is not a compliment, right? So that's a subtle way that turkeys are demeaned. Being called a pig is not a compliment. Another example of a subtle, demeaning statement which represents a prejudice that these animals don't matter and that we are superior, which to me is, again, one of the most egregious affronts to our humanity, is this notion that we are not connected to others, that we are entitled to treat them in these violent and abusive ways. And I would also say that treating other animals like that isn't only bad for the animals, it is bad for us. It's bad for us emotionally. You know, as I mentioned, it causes us to lose our empathy and start denigrating our victims. But in slaughterhouses, it's also bad physically. You know, these repetitive motion diseases or illnesses people get. You know, plus again, the emotional trauma that people experience at a slaughterhouse. Can you imagine what it would be like to work at one of those places where 8 hours a day your job is cutting the throats of animals? And these are not happy places. I have been in them. I have seen what the animals experience. I have seen what it does to people. And it's not good for anybody. On top of it, you have the inherent inefficiency of animal agriculture. To raise animals for food, we need enormous amounts of land. In the United States, 10 times more land is used for animal agriculture as compared to plant-based agriculture. Raising animals for food means that we need to grow food to feed farm animals. If we grew food and ate it directly, like corn, soy, and other products, we could feed far more people with far fewer resources. And because we've done this in the US and we've kind of extended ourselves, now global meat businesses are going into places like the Amazon and have been doing this forever. But in recent years, they've even become more bold about it. And you know, many of us, I'm sure, have heard about the fires burning in the Amazon, to clear forests in order to have land to graze animals or to grow crops like soybeans to feed farm animals. You know, I've talked to folks who are not particularly sympathetic to the vegan mindset, and when I've mentioned about how the rainforests are cut to grow soybeans, their quick response is, well, that's for tofu, which is completely ridiculous. It's not. Like something like 90% of the soybeans grown in the US are used to feed farm animals.
Wow.
So it's a huge number. And same thing in the Amazon. These crops are not being grown for people in most cases. And they're oftentimes GMO crops also, which then come with things like glyphosate, Monsanto, Roundup, and this is a pesticide that's actually getting into our bodies. And there are things that are happening to our health. And there's a lot that is not known about why there's gluten stuff, attention deficit stuff, there's Alzheimer's stuff, there's all kinds of issues that are sort of emerging that we don't have answers for why. And I really do believe that the environment we're creating through our food system is probably one of the contributors, not only in what we ingest, but also in what we create on the earth. And in places like North Carolina, where you have this massive hog industry, pigs in cages confined by the thousands indoors, and these massive manure lagoons that are making life very difficult for the neighbors, where you actually have the liquid manure spewed out onto the fields, and it gets onto the neighbors' land and sometimes onto their houses.
Wow.
And oftentimes these neighbors are people that don't have a lot of means. And meanwhile, the factory farming industry has resources, connections, they're friendly with legislators. So the neighbors have a really hard time getting justice from having crap literally sprayed on their house. So now there has been some litigation recently, and some of these lawsuits have gone in a very good direction, where juries have awarded the plaintiffs, the neighbors, tens of millions of dollars in damages. So what happens? Animal agriculture goes to the legislature in North Carolina and limits the amount of damages that can be paid on lawsuits like this. And that just happened within the past year or so. So the neighbors are continuing to fight, but there's this continuous battle back on the part of agribusiness that wants to keep doing what they're doing, wants to continue with their external costs and making others pay for them. Another huge external cost, of course, is healthcare. And we have a healthcare system that prescribes way too many medications and drugs. The pharmaceutical industry profits because of illness. And I'm not saying that there's this broad plan or this huge systemic effort to make people sick to make money on selling drugs, but there are belief systems that allow it to continue. Just as an example of this, or a couple examples, my father had a heart attack about 15, 20 years ago. He was in the hospital after his heart attack, and they're feeding him bacon and eggs. And then I'm 57 now, about 10 or so years ago. I hadn't been to a hospital in years. Figured might as well go to a hospital, just make sure everything's fine. So the doctor starts talking to me about heart disease in my family. And I said that my grandfather died of a heart attack, my father had a heart attack, and this doctor, without taking any tests or anything, said, I might want to put you on heart medication. I was like, wow. So this is, again, an example of a systemic mistake, right? Instead of treating a patient, really understanding their health, there's this assumption that at a certain age you need heart medication because of the food we're eating that contributes to heart disease.
Right.
You know, it's been estimated that we could save 70% on healthcare costs in this country by shifting to a whole foods plant-based diet. Yeah. So anyway, I'm kind of on the soapbox here, talking about the vegan thing, why it makes all the sense in the world. Many of you already maybe know this. For those of you who this is the first time you're hearing it, I'm glad you're here. How many people here, by the way, have been to Farm Sanctuary? Is it a lot of you have? Okay, great. Well, come back. And for those of you who haven't, please come out and visit. Farm Sanctuary is a place where animals are our friends, not our food. And we started back in 1986 investigating factory farms. And we would find living animals literally left for dead. We started rescuing them. So that's how Farm Sanctuary began. And in the early days, this was like 1986, we would be rescuing chickens who were worth nothing economically in the mind of the industry and take them to veterinarians. And the veterinarians would say, why are you spending $50 on this chicken that's worth nothing financially? Or we would have a goat or another farm animal that would come in that was very sick and required hundreds of dollars of veterinary care. And the veterinarians, again, they would scratch their heads and say, it makes no economic sense. Wow. You know, these animals are not worth that much. Why are you spending this money? But over time, we kept saying over and over to the vets that to us, these animals are not economic units. They are individuals. And we want to do what we can to help these individuals. And over time, the veterinarians started to understand that we had this different kind of relationship where we saw these animals not as commodities, but as our companions, as our friends. So that took some time, but it was a very positive shift where veterinarians got that. And we were paying our bills, so that was also, they were happy about that too. But then we had this rat on the farm. And you know, we would be feeding the animals, and every day we'd see this rat come out, so we kind of got to know this guy. And one day this rat didn't look very good. So we called the vet. And so we have this rat here. So we brought the rat in who was in bad shape, and the rat was euthanized. So the vet again recognized broadening the perspective of, hey, these are individual sentient creatures also, and should be treated with respect and dignity. And if they're suffering, we should try to do what we can to alleviate. So a couple of weeks after that, our sheep had parasites. They had worms. So I called the vet and I said, I got this worm here. There was a very long silence on the other side about the worm. Okay, what do you want us to do for the worm? And I had to explain that the worm was a parasite and we needed medicine for the sheep. So as vegans, and just doing shelter work and sanctuary work, you know, we relate to these other animals as our friends, not our food. But, you know, we live in a world where there are parasites that we have to deal with. And there are challenges we have to deal with. And where do we draw the lines becomes one of the big questions. And for me, in addition to treating other animals with kindness, which is what Farm Sanctuary started with, and it's a beautiful thing to come to the sanctuary and to see a turkey follow you around like a puppy dog, sit down in the barnyard, they sit in your lap. Or we have sheep who love human attention, they love to be petted, so you'll be petting them for a while, and when you stop petting them, they'll paw at you like a dog or a cat, and keep petting me. So these animals are not that different than cats and dogs, and once they learn to trust us, and they know they're in a safe place, they're able to flourish, and their personalities are able to come out, and they're able to express themselves, and to enjoy themselves, and to develop relationships with other animals and with people. Farm Sanctuary is a place of healing for animals who've experienced trauma, but it's also a place of healing for people, where we can connect with animals and see them as fellow earthlings. And there's so much beautiful stuff that happens at the farm. And I know some folks who are here have had magical experiences at the farm. And I would love nothing more than for more people to come out and have these magical experiences at the farm. Farm Sanctuary rescues animals, but we're also trying to change the food system. If we even rescued 1 million animals a year, it would be a drop in the bucket. There are millions of animals killed every day. Billions of animals every year, almost 10 billion every year in the US alone. If you include fish, it's in the trillions. So the numbers are immense. So how do we get at this? You rescue the animals you can, recognize you can't rescue them all, and you try to change the food system. And the reason animals suffer and live in these horrible confinement systems in factory farming, pigs, for example, often live in 2-foot wide metal crates for their whole lives. Chickens used for egg production in small wire cages where they can't even stretch their wings. They're constantly scraping against the bars, their feathers wear off. Animals raised for meat are confined by the thousands in these massive warehouses. They've been genetically bred to grow so fast. In the case of chickens, they grow 4 times faster than normal.
Wow.
Millions of them die of heart attacks at just a couple weeks old because their hearts and lungs cannot support that massive growth rate. But if they're growing 4 times faster than normal, economically, you can still afford to lose a significant percentage because they're getting to the market 4 times faster, right? So these are the economics of this industry. The other thing with chickens is that because they're so heavy, their legs have a hard time supporting their heavy bodies. And so they're in constant pain, especially towards the end of their lives. In the case of turkeys, they have also been genetically bred to grow very big and very fast. And in the case of turkeys, they've been so profoundly altered that they cannot even reproduce naturally anymore. So all commercial turkeys are products of artificial insemination.
Wow.
And the reason that that is the case mechanically is that breast meat is the most popular meat from turkeys, so they've been bred to have larger breasts, which means that the males and the females cannot mount to reproduce. Anyway, that's some of the factory farming realities, and it's just been getting worse and worse and worse. At the same time, there's more awareness of the cruelty these animals are experiencing. A lot of times citizens think it's wrong. We've been able to pass some laws to outlaw the worst confinement, to say animals need at least enough space to turn around and stretch their limbs. Very modest, but these are steps, positive steps. And the way we've been able to succeed has been through putting these measures on the ballot for a popular vote. For many, many years, we tried to pass laws to end cruelty going through the regular legislative process. A friendly legislator would introduce a bill. It would usually go to the Agriculture Committee, made up of lawmakers friendly to agribusiness, and would usually die without even a hearing. After doing this over and over, we said, you know what, if we take this to the people and we get it out of the legislature, which is very much influenced by animal agriculture, we can make a difference. And we started doing that in 2002 in Florida. That was the first state to do this, passed a law banning gestation crates for breeding pigs, 2-foot wide metal enclosures. Then we went to Arizona, did the same thing, California did the same thing.
Wow.
And so this has been a process, and citizens don't think these conditions are okay. That shows that we as a society do not accept that kind of cruelty as normal. And so now some businesses are coming up with products from animals that are treated less badly. Cage-free eggs, for example, or different kinds of humane meat. In most cases, those labels sound better than they are. And these companies have a vested interest in making certain things sound better than they are, because then they can charge you a lot more money. And so we're at a time now where there's a push towards so-called humane meat. It is something just to be mindful of because they're charging a lot more, and so the profit margin is greater, although the conditions are not necessarily much better. And so that's a time we are currently in right now, and it's just something to be mindful of. And at the end of the day, it's also worth thinking about whether the word humane and the word slaughter actually go together, right? So it's a violent act, it's cruel to animals, and it's also bad for people. But anyway, in terms of this vegan evolution that we're in the midst of, in addition to helping animals, I think we actually have to do a lot more to help farmers get out of doing what they're doing and provide opportunities to do something else. You know, we're not anti-farmer, we're anti-cruelty. We depend on farmers to produce food, but the government subsidy systems right now push it in the wrong direction. So we need to work on policies to push it in a better direction, and at the same time, support farms with our dollars, and to the extent we can go to farmers markets, participate in community-supported agriculture programs, be involved in local, regional food systems, support restaurants like the Organic Grill and others that are supporting organic farmers. Those are all very positive things to do that has a real impact over time. But the vegan movement, in addition to looking at animal cruelty and helping farmers evolve, is also, for me anyway, when I talk about kindness and living as kindly as possible, we also have to think about kindness to ourselves. You know, eating food that doesn't make us sick. We need to think about kindness to the environment, not supporting a food system that's destroying the planet the way animal agriculture does. And we also have to talk about kindness, you know, to other people. And you know, in the vegan world, we can be a real passionate group. And you know, can sometimes get very angry and upset with other people who are supporting this violent system. But it's important to recognize that most people grow up with certain habits. And people do what they do because it's what everybody around them did growing up, it's what they're used to doing, it's what, again, is incentivized in our current food system. You know, I grew up eating meat without thinking about it. And I think most people here probably the same, and some people may still eat meat. And if you do, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for being open to these issues, you know. And I'll also say that even the most vegan isn't perfect. Nobody is perfect. We are all works in progress. And so it's important to be open-minded, to be humble, to listen, and just to try to do better as we go. So for me, you know, again, as a vegan, there's been sort of a long history of being very critical of factory farming. And I think we need to be critical of factory farming, but love the sin or hate the sin. Try to help farmers get out of that system, because I don't think people that are in the factory farming system really like being there. You know, and so I think creating paths out is a huge place where there's new potentials, especially with all the capital that's starting now to go into things like Beyond Meat or the Impossible Burger or other plant-based businesses or the plant-based milks. That's huge what is happening there. So we're at a really great time. And I guess I'll just open it up for questions because I've been talking here for a while and I just wanted to hear what you all want to talk about.
You mentioned a couple of things on the policy front. I wanted to hear like what Farm Sanctuary is doing.
Yeah. On the policy front, Farm Sanctuary has a long history of doing that. And on the policy work, there's like legislation, litigation, laws, and there's also campaigns to influence businesses. And some examples of what we've done historically are the campaigns to outlaw confinement of animals. One of the laws that we were part of passing was in Michigan to outlaw confining animals. And we banned veal crates for calves in small wooden crates, battery cages for egg-laying hens, so they have to have at least enough space to stretch their wings, and gestation crates for pigs. The veal crates and the gestation crates have appropriately been phased out. But the egg industry is not ready yet to phase out the battery cages. So they're trying to roll back the legislation in Michigan. So we're part of an effort to push and try to have that Michigan law enforced. So in some cases, you're playing defense, just trying to prevent successes from going backwards. So that's happening in Michigan. Another policy success we had to do with influencing a business. Up in Watkins Glen, New York, we have many visitors who are vegan. They want vegan food in Watkins Glen, so we asked the restaurants if they'll sell vegan food. One of the restaurants in Watkins Glen is a Burger King. So in the early 1990s, we went to the local Burger King, and they agreed to sell a veggie burger. After some campaigning, they actually sold the BK Veggie nationwide. This is in the early mid-90s, which we were very, very happy about. Now, it was not publicized nearly as much as the Impossible Whopper, which is on NFL football game commercials, which is amazing. But I think it reflects sort of the growth of opportunity and investment of plant-based businesses and mainstream companies too. So we've made progress there. Policy-wise in Washington, D.C., you know, I'm talking to a lot of people there. Right now, things are kind of going backwards. And so it's trying to prevent things from going very far backwards. And there's also sometimes efforts to greenwash opportunities. And an example of this is like the Green New Deal, which is a really great concept with principles of living sustainably and not creating more climate crisis problems. But one of the so-called solutions that some folks are pegging to the Green New Deal are methane digesters for factory farms. And a methane digester is where they take the manure lagoons with all this feces, which is emitting methane, and which is a greenhouse gas, and they say if we can capture that methane and turn it into energy, that's a solution. Now on the surface, you know, you can say, okay, yeah, the methane is not going into the air, that's good. But what it ultimately does is it creates this dependency now on animal manure for energy. And then you create an infrastructure to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars or more in that direction. And then you now have this incentive to continue with factory farming. And it hasn't even looked at the actual costs of growing all the corn and soy and then harvesting that and then feeding the animals and all the inefficiencies there. So with growing awareness about environmental problems and with some discussion of it, there are also attempts to continue perpetuating the system and using it to sell programs that enable factory farming to continue.